Welcome back to Direct Station, where politics and planets collide and converge. I am Kate Carey. On Sunday morning, Tehran time, the sun hit an exact 90-degree angle from Saturn, planet Saturn, adding a serious gravitational force to an already fiercely potent sky. And the United States dropped bombs into 3 locations in Iran. Why? The reasons depend on who we listen to, and there's plenty of voices justifying the end, if not the means. Everything from protecting our ally, Israel, to preventing nuclear proliferation, to, if you listen really closely, a significant theme of rhetoric assuring us that we are fulfilling and productively accelerating an end times prophecy from a seminal Judeo-Christian text. For those of you just tuning in for the first time, here at Direct Station, we track what's happening with the humans, and we wonder at what's brewing in the sky in order to make meaning of it all, in order to center ourselves, our bodies ourselves, through this upheaval. And we find a narrow path upon which we can walk so that we might come out of this more whole, more clear, and more sane. If astrology is new or absurd to you, I invite you to use it as simply a story time that might soothe you or intrigue you. If the news feels dangerous to your well-being, I do aim to pick a thing we all ought to be aware of and break it down so that you can tolerate knowing a little bit more about it as you move through the world. Today, we're diving into something that has been written in the stars for centuries. We look at America's return to large-scale warfare, driven by a divine delusion and the collision between competing visions of a world in which we all have to live. And I do promise, as always, to visit these shadow places. This time, it's war and religious manipulation, and we will come out of the conversation on the other side, remembering our light, our power, and our precious, precious hope. We're going to understand the cosmic weather that made this inevitable. We're going to trace the historical patterns that show us where this sort of thing has led in the past, and we're going to find our way to consciousness and action that can help us navigate what's coming next. Because, friends, this is just the beginning. So let's start with what's actually happened. On the 22nd, on Sunday morning, Tehran time, the Trump administration launched what they're calling a preemptive defensive strike against Iranian nuclear facilities. But if you dig beneath the surface, this wasn't just about nuclear weapons. This is about a faction within the administration that believes they are fulfilling a biblical prophecy in what they call a cosmic war that has been brewing for centuries and centuries, millennia even, but in particular, since in their lifetimes, since 1979. As we know, there's a powerful evangelical influence, or more precisely, the influence of the New Apostolic Reformation, or NAR, as well as the independent charismatic movement, both within that evangelical community. In this White House that views the Iranian Revolution of 1979 as the beginning of the final cosmic battle between good and evil. To them, when Ayatollah Khomeini established the world's first modern Shia Islamic theocracy, he didn't just challenge American power. He set up what they see as Satan's earthly kingdom in direct opposition to God's, and therefore their plan for Israel. Here's the theology. I'm assuming many of you know it, but I think in this context, it is worth reviewing, right? Israel must control the entire biblical land from the Euphrates to the Nile before Christ can return. Iran, as one of the primary obstacles to this vision, isn't just a geopolitical rival. It's literally standing in the way of the second coming of the Son of their God. For 45 years, these advisors, many of whom now are in critical federal positions, have been building a narrative that Iran represents the prophetic enemy, Persia, that must be defeated in the end times battles described in the Ezekiel portion, a significant prophetic portion of their seminal text. And here's where it gets wild. Some of these key advisors firmly believe with all that they are that escalating this conflict in the Middle East will force God's hand, accelerating that second coming of the Son of their God. They're not just responding to Iranian actions. They are seizing an opportunity of a weakness in their enemy with an eye on the triggering of an Armageddon that they won't need to suffer, because true believers in this belief system will be swept up by, protected by, and even exalted in the rapture that comes before the worst of it hits. But here's the internal contradiction to this holy vision. Even while all ranks today across that MAGA cinematic universe are rallying behind their president, you've got the No More Wars faction, people like some of Trump's original base who voted for him precisely because they were exhausted by endless Middle East conflicts. And then you've got this holy war faction, the advisors and neoconservatives who see this as a divine mission. Hell, you even have a good number of people outside of the administration and outside of that belief system who aren't terribly upset that this happened, even if it's got potential to really upset the globe. But for the most part, this is not foreign policy. This is religious warfare disguised as geopolitics and allyship from a group of people who shroud themselves and their policies in mantras supporting Jews in Israel, but who flirt with or even embrace anti-Semitism when issues of geography are decentered. And the planets? Well, they're explaining this quite calmly, telling us about this pattern that we're living. So let's take a look. There's an extraordinary astrological configuration happening right now that explains not just the bombing, but the entire trajectory we're on and the general experience that we're having, everything just continuing to build and build and build. And when I show you the historical parallels, it might reveal some insight into what is unfolding. Today, I need to tell you about another conflagration that involves more than a few characters. I'm going to keep it as simple as I can, but I do need to bring 3 or 4, at one moment 5, of them in. First, we have Jupiter, the planet of expansion. Expansion of the religious, the spiritual, the political, the material. Jupiter grows what it touches. Over the course of last week, Jupiter brought its expansive power into a perfect square, a sort of fraught, tense, and disruptive 90-degree angle. That's what squares do in astrology. With first Saturn, Mr. Borders, Mr. Discipline, and then Neptune, Mr. Spirit World, Mr. Religious Beliefs, who are themselves, those two, Neptune and Saturn, approaching a once in 36-year conjunction. Meanwhile, Mars, Mr. War, Mr. Aggression, Mr. Action, is at an angle that we haven't talked about yet to that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. A quincunx is a 150-degree angle and creates a sense of unease and displacement between two forces. In this case, 3, because Neptune and Saturn are so close to each other, so close to a conjunction with each other, right? And they're in this quincunx with Mars. Okay, so Mars is in an uneasy, uncomfortable quincunx angle to this already weird mix of boundaries, no boundaries, religion and structure, discipline and fantasy, which is alone by itself like 6/10 of our problem. Saturn represents structure, authority, and the imposition of order. Neptune represents spiritual vision, dreams, and when corrupted, sort of the shadow side, everything has a shadow side, right? Everything and everyone, delusion and propaganda. So when those two pieces come together, Saturn and Neptune, you get a rigid enforcement of spiritual fantasy. You get ideological movements that believe they are divinely ordained to reshape the world. You have a lot of borders moving. And surely all the lives of the people who live in that world are also restructured, reordered because of an ideology. But here's where it gets really big. Jupiter squaring this conjunction means those delusions get expanded and amplified to a global scale. Jupiter is the great amplifier. And when it's in hard aspect to a Neptune and Saturn conjunction, with Mars involved, it weaponizes and expands spiritual vision. Remember, Mars represents military action, warfare, and a masculine principle of conquest. And he's like a grumpy, thwarted warrior in this configuration because the angle that he's at, this quincunx that he's at, is just uncomfortable, right? So he's like this grumpy, thwarted warrior in too tight clothes, not liking the way things are rising, right? So This combo turns religious feeling into an imperial mission for him. And then, guys, a little after dawn in Tehran, the sun joins in and shines its heat, its spotlight in that square. It's getting very close to Jupiter. So now it's the one causing the square, right? And so he's saying, look at this. Let me show this spotlight on this moment. Let me show you a conflagration. We literally have the planetary signature, therefore, of a holy war. It's going to take a while to unfold, right? So I'm not announcing or prophesying tomorrow that like this moment is now the beginning of a holy war, but it is a very important expansion of our progression towards a holy war. Finally, please forgive me, I do have to add one more detail. Venus. Beautiful, loving, generous Venus. The planet of values, of resources, of what we hold dear, is in a super awkward half square, semi-square, between the Saturn-Neptune square with Jupiter. She's exactly in the middle between that Jupiter expansion force, that like tense causal force. She's in the middle of this Neptune Saturn on one side, Jupiter. So could say Neptune Saturn's at 3, Jupiter's at noon. She's at like 1.5, right? So she's in this funky halfway point between these squared planets. And she doesn't like it at all. Semi-squares create tension. They create friction. So our stated values, that's Venus, are in a conflict with our actions, right? That's Mars, who's way over on the other side in this 150-degree angle, this quincunx. So these guys are all talking to each other. I'm telling you, astrology is mathy as fuck. We say that we are defending democracy while we are bombing countries that never attacked us. We claim to follow the Prince of Peace while escalating towards a World War III, right? The president who was elected on an anti-war platform, a guy who's been vying for the Nobel Peace Prize, for heaven's sakes, is suddenly, without consulting a single ally or a co-equal branch of government, decides to drop bombs so big that there's only one airplane in the world big enough, strong enough to carry them. So this configuration hasn't happened in our lifetimes. The combination of events, right? The Mars part, the Venus part, the Jupiter part, conjunction part. But parts of it have happened before, for sure. And every single version of the story marks significant changes, including the rise or fall of major ideological movements, accompanied by religious justification for military conquest. Now, here's where the synchronicity becomes super compelling. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction cycle is intrinsically linked to the birth, growth, peak, crisis, and death of major ideological movements. And when Jupiter gets involved, those movements go global. Let's start with 1846 to 1848. Saturn and Neptune are in conjunction. They're together in the same spot in the sky, right? At that moment, Jupiter is in a hard aspect, meaning causing this intense effect. I'm not going to get into its angle, but it's causing the same kind of expansive hardness. What happened? Well, the Communist Manifesto is published. The same year, democratic revolutions erupt across Europe, demanding constitutional governments and workers' rights. While most of those revolutions or movements are suppressed, they mark the beginning of a secular ideology. Multiple, actually, like socialism, like nationalism, competing with traditional religious authority for people's ultimate loyalty. And we do know where that led. Jump to 1917. Saturn and Neptune are together again. The Russian Revolution topples the Tsarist regime, but notice how the Bolsheviks used religious to hell fervor for their secular aims. Lenin and his followers didn't just want political change. They wanted to transform human nature itself. They believed they were creating heaven on earth. Sound familiar? Fast forward again to 1952, 1953, another Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Stalin dies. There's a Rush theme here. Any Russia in the news, right? Stalin dies, ending one era of ideological totalitarianism. The Korean War cements the division between communist and capitalist worlds. Interestingly, this is when many of today's world leaders are born. Putin, Xi Jinping. The generation that would inherit and eventually transform these ideological battles is born under a Neptune-Saturn conjunction. But then, 1989, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that ends the Cold War, the Berlin Wall falls. The Soviet Empire collapses. Again, Russian themes. I'm assuming we're going to get to that in another episode, right? On the same day of the fall of the wall, Jupiter opposes that now separating conjunction, falling precisely opposite Saturn. Mr. Structure, Mr. Discipline, right? So Jupiter is now restructuring Europe. Its discipline, its gravity, its consequences. And now, 2025, Saturn and Neptune approaching a conjunction once again. They're going to get within a degree now, with Jupiter square amplifying everything. In a minute, I'm going to get to their actual conjunction, which happens in February of 26. But what do we get as this thing starts to get really, really close? We get an administration driven by end times theology, escalating towards global conflict in the name of fulfilling biblical prophecy, bringing restructuring wrath to our entire world order. In 2015-16, we even saw all this tension rising during a Saturn-Neptune square when they were 90 degrees apart. And Jupiter, again, Mr. Expansion, is on top of Mars, Mr. War. And so 15-16, that's when ISIS explodes across the region. The Syrian war reaches its peak, and the nuclear deal negotiations consume global attention. The square and its assist from Mars and Jupiter, who are combined and therefore big and aggressive, force choices, create crisis, demand action, all on this disputed, sacred, ancient land. But now, as Saturn and Neptune approach their conjunction, it will become exact in February of 2026. We are headed towards a resolution of this entire arc. Either the evangelical vision of defeating Persia to trigger the second coming succeeds, and the son of their God arrives, or the whole end times delusion collapses under the weight of its own contradictions and ungodly lack of integrity. The bombing of Iran isn't random escalation for many in this administration and observing it, for many who voted for it. It is the attempt to force the climax of what evangelicals have been building towards since in their lifetimes, 1979, in their tradition for millennia. 1979, I should add, Mr. War, Mars, squared Neptune, Mr. Collective Dreams. All right, so these dreams have been building for this moment within Iranian society and within American society. Each side convinced that this generation will see the final cosmic battle. Similarly now, Mars is in that uncomfortable quincunx to the configuration of Saturn-Neptune, creating tension between militant action and expansive religious delusion and rigid enforcement on top of it. And in our recent history, remember George W. Bush claiming God told him to strike at Iraq? Well, that was during a window when Jupiter was conjunct Neptune, on top of Neptune in 2003, making those evangelical dreams expand and reach and take over the thinking of some very powerful people. The bombing of Iran is not an aberration. It is the latest chapter in a pattern that has been playing out for centuries and centuries whenever these planets dance together. So what does all this cosmic weather actually mean for how we navigate the moment? First, let's understand that we're living through something that's been astrologically discussed or addressed and seen as more or less inevitable. On my astro nerd life side, one of my favorite duos are these two young kings of astrological lore and meaning. These two guys I want to tell you about for just a sec, Aston Kopic and Chris Brennan. They gather almost monthly to talk about the world and what's happened and what's coming. And they do this on Chris's show. It's called the Astrology Podcast. And those two have been worrying over this period of time, and next February in particular, and Iran in particular, as long as I have been listening. They're not alone at all, but I mention them in case you have any desire to go a little deeper with any of this. They really are some of the leaders of the next generation of astronomers. And I literally can't get enough of their work. But all this to say, there's a world you're probably not aware of where almost everyone has sort of braced for this. It has been in the discourse in this sort of astro nerd universe. I want to remind you that these people are scholars, right? They have spent decades of their lives, multiple 20, 30, 40 years of their lives, going deep on the history of this, going deep on the tradition of this, going deep on the teaching, which go back to the ancients across regions, across cultures, across societies. And we come up with the same answers. It is rich, it is deep, right? Like this idea in the American society where we just kind of reject it because it's dumb, it's in the newspaper, it's this little paragraph, doesn't mean much. It is a profoundly significant and rich tradition and community. I invite you to it. The planetary positions that made some form of kinetic ideological explosion unavoidable, I'm telling you, has been studied and discussed in a world that you just haven't known existed, right? There's a lot of different opinions within that world about whether the hype is crisis or drama, but it's something. The question was never whether it would happen, but how would it manifest and what we would do with it. The evangelical influence channeled this energy toward holy war in the Middle East for decades, but it could have manifested differently. Other administrations might have channeled Jupiter square Saturn and Neptune towards a massive infrastructure project or a space exploration or even genuine spiritual renaissance for our country. The planets create the weather. How we respond to that weather is totally our choice. It's always going to be something with the themes that are written, but the closer we are to living in alignment with the highest possibility, in alignment with the light, the more these moments can lift us and all of humanity. In this particular case, we have chosen not to do that. We have chosen not to go that route, right? We are absolutely wrapping ourselves in the shadow side of this configuration. But here's what's coming that you need to understand. We are heading towards the exact Saturn-Neptune conjunction in February of 26. This is a cosmic timer on everything we're experiencing. That conjunction will be the moment of truth for this entire cycle. Historically, these conjunctions reveal the fundamental contradictions in ideological movements. They do force a choice between doubling down on the delusion or awakening to a reality. The administration's current unity today around Trump, and I mean, even allies who wouldn't have done it this way, being like, that's all right, we're into it. Suddenly deciding that bombing Iran is a good thing. Anyway, that unity is temporary. The deeper ideological split between the no more wars people and the holy war people will resurface as a sort of cosmic pressure that intensifies. And my friends, it will intensify. By February 26th, we will see either the full implementation of the end times delusion, meaning escalation towards genuine global war. This is why World War III is on everyone's lips today, because this is a configuration that is an echo, like a pre-echo of what is happening in February, right? So no one's confused about the echo, the sound that they hear. The sound that they hear sounds like World War III, as that's certainly an option for February 26th. But another option is the complete collapse of that reality as the truth kind of crashes into fantasy. The planets are setting us up for a moment where contradictions can no longer be sustained. The buzzer will go off at that time. The game will be up at that time. The cosmic weather is creating the conditions for either collective awakening or collective catastrophe. And that choice is not up to the planets. The timing is, but not the what, right? The theme is, but not the outcome. That's up to you, me, everybody, everywhere. These people on this planet at this time. So I want to share what's coming through for me about this moment, because I think there's a spiritual assignment here that goes beyond politics or even war. We're being asked to distinguish between genuine spiritual vision and weaponized religion. We are being asked to choose between divine guidance and imperial delusion. We are being asked to decide between the God of love and the God of war. The zealous advisors and voters driving this war or potential war are not connecting with the divine. They're projecting their own fears and their own desires onto their understanding of their God. They are not fulfilling prophecy. They are trying to force the hand of their God based on the parts of a text that a series of aggressive patriarchal regimes have preserved and cherished and taught. And there's something deeply blasphemous about that, isn't there? You can manipulate the divine timeline through violence and power over other people and profound harm to other peoples. It really does violate human integrity and decency. But here's what I'm saying. This moment is revealing the ultimate bankruptcy of using God to justify anything, right? And certainly to justify empire. The contradictions are becoming so obvious that even people who have been caught up in the spell are feeling uncomfortable today. Your job, our job, is not to fight the energy, but to channel it differently, right? It's the same flow that could cause either outcome. Saturn-Neptune energy at its highest expression creates structures that serve genuine spiritual vision. Jupiter square energy can expand our understanding of what's possible rather than expanding our capacity for delusion. Neptune causes both addiction and connection to the gods, right? Like Neptune can go either way. This is a moment for building alternative structures. Saturn's there to help with that, for creating communities that embody the values we claim to hold, for demonstrating what genuine spiritual practice looks like when it's not twisted into justification for harm or the collection of power. The planets are asking us, what do you really believe? Are you willing to live those beliefs, even when the culture around you is drunk on holy war fantasies? The future is being decided right now, not by the people with the most weapons, but by the people with the clearest vision of what comes after this empire finally exhausts itself. We must prepare. We must be prepared. What is our Project 2028? Have you started writing it down? In Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism, she writes about how totalitarian movements always present themselves as fulfilling higher purpose. She observes, quote, "The ideal condition for mob rule is when politics become a matter of faith and when political opinions transform into sacred convictions." Sound familiar? What's chilling to me is how accurately she pinpoints the mechanism that we're seeing now. When political strategy becomes religious mission, when bombing Iran becomes God's will, or as Ted Cruz called it last week, something commanded by God. When imperial expansion becomes biblical fulfillment, that's the moment democracy dies and is replaced by theocracy. The ironic detail to me of this misogynistic regime that seeks to control women's bodies, life options, hell, even votes, is claiming that this is the arrogance of believing that an effort to free mistreated Iranian women. The irony of that detail is just not lost on me. But Arendt also understands that such movements contain the seeds of their own destruction. She wrote, quote, "The trouble with totalitarian regimes is not that they play power politics in an especially ruthless way, but that behind their politics is hidden an entirely new and unprecedented concept of power." It's not that hidden in this circumstance, right? They wrote it down. She goes on, "Power as a direct emanation of a movement and the expression of the will of a totalistic ideology." That is what they wrote down. The key word there is unprecedented. These movements always believe that they're fulfilling ancient prophecy, but they're actually creating something that has never existed before. And because it has never existed before, it is wholly unnatural and is ultimately unsustainable. James Baldwin captures the spiritual dimension of this moment in The Fire Next Time, where he writes, quote, "If the concept of God has any validity or any use, it can only be to make us larger, freer, and more loving. If God cannot do this, then it is time we got rid of him." End quote. The God being invoked to justify bombing Iran is not making anyone larger, freer, or more loving. It's making people smaller, more fearful, more hateful, which means it's not God at all. It's the projection of human ego onto divinity. It's a crime of faith, from where I'm standing. Baldwin understood that genuine spiritual experience always moves us towards greater love and greater justice, never towards greater violence, never towards greater domination of an other. The test of any religious ideology or movement is simple. Does it increase love or does it increase fear? So where does it leave us? What can we actually do with this information besides feeling overwhelmed or terrified by it? Well, first, as usual, I will suggest some actions you might take. Document the religious rhetoric you're seeing that is being used to justify this war. And it is a war, or it shall be. Screenshot the end times language when it crosses your timeline. Save the clips of evangelical leaders celebrating the bombing as God's will. Archive the evidence of how faith is being weaponized. Discuss it with the people in your lives. Show it to them. Reveal it to them. When this delusion finally collapses, and it will, we will need that documentation. We will need that understanding of how it happened in order to prevent it from happening again in the future. May our children or our children's children understand this thing better than we did as we walked right into it. We'll need the videos of harm on the ground. We will need the drunk on power justifications. We do need to support organizations providing humanitarian aid to these regions, to affected regions. The people of Iran do not choose this conflict, and they'll bear the greater cost. So we must find ways to send resources and solidarity across those artificial boundaries created by empire, created by power over. Most importantly, let's together create alternative models of what genuine spiritual practice might look like. If you are part of a faith tradition, work to reclaim it from those who would use it to justify violence. If you are not religious, model what it means to hold spiritual values without religious language. Show what it looks like to act from love and not fear. Second, I want to offer a practice for your own spiritual health. Meditate on, distinguish between divine guidance and ego projection. When you hear someone claim, God told me to do something harmful, ask yourself, hell, ask the person if you like, does this expand love or does this expand fear? Does this create more peace or does this create more suffering? Does this create more freedom or does this create more empire? Does this bring the best in humanity out or does this bring the shadow of humanity out? Does this bring the highest calling in me or does it bring out the worst in me? Does this summon my light or does this summon my shadow? We can also practice holding the tension between that righteous anger at injustice and that compassion, that understanding that even the perpetrators are caught in a delusion, right? So we can respond with hate, but we could also respond. The practice can be to respond with grace, not tolerance for harmful behavior or language or even ideology, but with grace for the human who is trapped, right? The evangelical advisors pushing for war are not evil people. I'm sure a few of them are sociopathic, but it's certainly not all of them, right? They're deeply confused about the nature of the divine. It doesn't excuse their actions, but it helps us respond from wisdom and strength rather than a hateful, unstable reactivity. And third, I ask you a reflection. You could write about it. You could talk to someone who makes you feel safe about it. Well, what's the difference? Here's the question. What's the difference between your highest spiritual vision and your ego's desires, dressed up in spiritual language? As Jupiter squares Saturn-Neptune, we are all being asked to get brutally honest about when we're truly following divine guidance versus when we're following our own agenda. Right? This administration's confusion about God and God's will is an extreme version of confusion that we all carry. And if you find yourself feeling hopeless about the trajectory we're on, remember that every spiritual tradition teaches the same thing. The darkest hour comes just before the dawn. The intensity of this delusion is actually a sign that something new wants to be born. The timing is nigh. But what gets born depends on many of us staying awake during the birth process, which if you've endured it, is not easy, right? I'd rather be checked out, thank you very much. I want to close today by sharing a small portion of a poem by Ahmad Shamli. Shamli was an Iranian poet who spoke out against authoritarianism and destruction that's been enabled by false claims of God's promise. I want to read a little bit of his precious work. The title is The Song of Abraham and Fire. About halfway through, he says, I was not a servile little slave, and my way to a heavenly paradise was not the path of submission and civility. I deserved a God of another kind, worthy of a creature who does not humble himself for the indispensable morsel. And then he finishes with, mountain-like, formidable, and firm. Before falling on the ground, you were dead. Yet neither God nor Satan, but an idol wrote your destiny. An idol whom others worshipped. An idol who others worshipped. Y'all, our time of having the world explained to us by people who project their own vision, their own ego, their own earthly desires on their God and tell you that it is your God too, is something that we are shifting out of. And the orientation of an entire country organized around the idea that one person is here to bring this about, right? It's bringing us to this category. The role of this man, I have come to believe, is the splinter, right? Is the causal angst, the causal pain, the causal harm, the causal agent of chaos that's going to drive us to this reckoning of how we are going to make peace with each other in service of our gods. I firmly believe this is possible. I firmly believe we could live together and share all the land, share the land, have a home, that have things growing out of the earth in the home that we receive. Right? There is a brighter future possible for all of us. There is a different way of living together in harmony for all of us. So y'all, our assignment, as I understand it, is to face the reality of what's happening without turning away from it, to see the weaponization of faith for what it is, to distinguish between a genuine spiritual vision and an imperial delusion, and then to choose over and over and over again to embody the love we claim to believe in. The planets are creating the weather for both a holy war and for genuine spiritual awakening. Which one depends entirely on how many of us choose love over fear, truth over delusion, genuine holiness, actual holiness, over weaponized belief systems. If you would like to understand how this is working in you and on you personally, as you are part of this collective rising, this collective possibility, especially as we head towards that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in 26, it would be my great honor to look into it with you. I offer readings and coaching that helps people navigate their unique relationship with the energy and to better understand your unique assignment during this wild and challenging, for some of us, really brutal. I don't know if you noticed last week, but I didn't post anything. That Mars-Jupiter square we had last week, which I didn't even get to teach you about, hit on a bunch of my really important placements. And I knocked myself out. Like, I got a concussion and was like in bed for 3 days. Right? So like understanding where that thing that is affecting everybody fell on me was helpful as I navigated a very unexpected timeout. But my email's in the episode description if you wanna look at your chart and understand what's happening to you and how this whole thing that's unfolding for all of us is unfolding in and on your life. I also want to share with you, I'm going to start posting as often. I mean, I don't want to make promises, but I want to share with you that I want to start posting twice a week. And the idea would be on Mondays to do these episodes where we kind of look back at the events of last week, but then on Wednesdays to really start looking at individual charts of people and movements, people and things, people and entities, to look at the birth charts. And like I'll start with the birth chart of the United States, right? And then, we have to, of course, do the birth chart of our president, right? There's so much information available to us. We can even look at the birth chart of the Iranian Revolution if we wanted to. I looked at it today. Anyway, that's what I'm going to start doing on Wednesdays. Keep doing this on Mondays, assuming I don't fall down and knock myself out in a flooded kitchen that I caused. So, watch out. The planets will affect your decisions and your non-decisions and your unconscious moves. Anyway, until next time, remember that what happens next, both individually and collectively, remains our sacred, shared responsibility. Hold it dear, y'all. Until next time, be well, be conscious, and be kind. I'll see you soon.